Welcome. For those of you who are new, welcome to a Yin Yoga podcast. And for those of you that are return listeners, what's up, Yinnies? Welcome back. On that note, for those of you that have been here before, if you've been here more than a couple of times, if you have been finding this podcast helpful, I would be so grateful if you would take a moment right now to pause this recording wherever you're listening or watching and to do one or all of these things. If you are watching on YouTube, take a moment to like the video, subscribe if you have not already, so that you get these as soon as they come out. And then if you wouldn't mind, partway through or at the end, leave me a comment. Let me know what you thought of the episode. Were there any ahas, any takeaways, any things where you were like, oh, I hadn't thought of that, or things that I say where you were like, yes, fist pumping. Please let me know in the comments if you are watching this on YouTube. And for those of you who didn't know, because you're listening to this, you can always watch these also on YouTube. And those are uploaded as the completely unedited version. Like I literally just upload the Zoom recording to YouTube. Whereas with audio, I do go through and remove some of the extra ums and ahs and pauses and things because they don't come across well when you're listening. So that's something you should know. If you're a visual person, you prefer to watch, please know that's there for you. For those of you that prefer to listen and are listening on one of the podcast apps, if you're on Apple, you can go right to my podcast episode page. So like click on a Yin Yoga podcast or search out a Yin Yoga podcast. When it pops up, scroll down a little bit and you'll see about halfway down that there's a spot where it says leave a review. If you could leave me some 5 stars, I would be super grateful. The other thing you can do on Apple is also leave a written review. So if you would do one or both of those things, I would be super grateful. Thank you so much for that. And for those of you on Spotify, you can also, again, get on the main page for my, so not in your feed, you actually want to click on my episode, make sure that you're following or subscribing, and then click the 5 stars. And that will give me a review there. One of the reasons that you'll hear podcasters often talk about this is because, especially with a fairly new podcast, and this one it's not even a year old yet, it's just a baby still. The more likes and sort of listens, of course, downloads and follows and stars and written reviews that a podcast gets, the more likely Apple or Spotify, which I mean, there are other apps as well, but those are the two biggies right now. It's more likely that they will show them to people that are searching out in the search Yin Yoga podcasts or yoga podcasts, etc., or just searching Yin. One of my friends and colleagues told me that she was actually on Spotify just searching Yin, looking for music, and my podcast popped up. So the reason that happens is because of awesome, generous folks like you who take about 2 minutes out of their time to do this. So if you wouldn't mind, pause right now. I'll wait. It's okay. Go for it. And offer a review. That's for those of you who've been here before. If you're new, don't worry about it. You gotta wait and see first. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate you very, very much. And before we get into today's topic, I also just want to share a little bit of a testimonial or praise that I've gotten on my therapeutic Yin Yoga teacher training program. So this one is from Jillian Green. Nick's passion and knowledge for Yin Yoga helped to keep me engaged. It has made me realize how influential it can be to include Yin practice in your yoga repertoire. I'm so happy I took this training with Nick. I did another training with a teacher who was teaching Yin, but it was more like Hatha than Yin. I feel much more knowledgeable in Yin Yoga now, and also it's great to know where it originated. She was very professional and knowledgeable. I felt supported through the training. Nick was amazing and brought a huge depth of information to the topic and did a great job of keeping the conversations on track. This training was amazing and it went by really fast. I can't wait to learn more. So that's from Jillian Green. Thank you, Jillian. So if you are a yoga teacher who is either not yet trained in yin yoga or is wanting to add more additional yin training, because most yin teachers don't just stop at one training, then you can check out by clicking the link in my bio. There's a link there that says get on the wait list. That will take you to the page where you can read more about my training, and then you can get on the wait list. And how you get on the wait list is if you look way up in my photograph, there's a button there that you can push and enter your name and email, or way down on the very bottom of the page. Also an opportunity to add your email. And if you're there long enough, a little polite pop-up will slide on over and say, hey, do you want to get on the wait list? And you could enter your name and email there. When you get on the wait list, here's what you get. First of all, you get a free PDF sequence, head to toe yin practice. Then you're going to get a few days later a video of the same practice so that you can practice it. And then you're going to get little snippets and nuggets from me along the way. So you'll get these podcast episodes delivered in your inbox. You will get little sort of samplers of my training, little video snippets of my training so that you can kind of see behind the curtain. You will also get early registration notice. So before I post it everywhere on the social medias, I always go to the wait list first and let y'all know registration is open. So you'll get that first. And then the other thing that you get when you're on the wait list is the first 5 that sign up can use a 25% off discount code. And that is only available on the wait list. I do not share that anywhere else. Okay. So those are all the reasons why you might want to get on the wait list of my training. So if you've been around here a few times and you've been liking my point of view, if you've been learning from me, if you've been getting some ahas and you're like, maybe I need some more yin training, or maybe I need a yin training, then I would encourage you to check that out. The link again is in the episode notes. All right, my friends, let's get into today's topic. This topic came up, as often some of my ideas for topics come up when I'm in one of those yin Facebook groups and I'm, scrolling around, seeing what everyone's got to say and trying to be helpful if someone's got a question I can answer, or just, seeing what everyone's doing, what's going on. And sometimes I'll see questions in those groups, and usually I will then take that question and I will type it out in my magic iPhone in my list of podcast ideas, because that's where I keep track of podcast ideas. So if you're listening to this and you have an idea for a yin yoga subject, or if you have a question specific to yin yoga that you want me to cover in the podcast, send me a DM on Instagram or on Facebook. Just let me know, hey, I'd like to have you cover this. So I'm always willing to add extra episodes to my list. They have to be yin related though. This is a yin podcast, so somehow connected to the yin experience. So I was scrolling through and I found a question. And it wasn't the question itself that struck me. It was actually somebody's answer in the comment feed. Somebody in the comment feed said, yin yoga is not suitable for beginners. And I remember thinking, say what? Well, that's news to me. And I have no idea why that person thinks that. I did actually ask, why do you say that? Didn't get a response. So that's what we're going to break down today. Is yin yoga suitable for beginners? Maybe yes, maybe no. The answer is in yin, as it always is in yin, or often is. Well, yes, no, and it depends. So let's break this down a little bit more. If somebody comes to yoga, they're a brand new yogi, they come to yoga, they're a beginner because they want to get their yoga butt, or they want to get their yoga body in time for swimsuit season, or detox, or do yoga, air quotes, exercises, or get a yoga workout. If that's why they're coming to yoga, if they have fallen under this misconception that yoga is fitness and it's another way to work out when you're not at the gym, if that's why they're coming, then yin yoga is probably not for that beginner, because they're going to show up in class and they're going to be still and quiet and not move, and they're not going to be getting their needs met as far as what they thought they were coming to yin for. And this is one of the reasons why, if you're a studio owner and you're listening to this, you really want to make sure that your class descriptions are very clear. I know that sometimes people don't read them anyway. That's a whole other thing. But at least for those who do read it, make sure that you say still, quiet, meditative, etc., so that when someone's reading your classes, they know which one is going to fit their needs. So that's one type of beginner, right? We could say that's one style of student, somebody who has misunderstood what yoga really is and thinks that it's another way to, air quotes, get a workout, and something else to do to, air quotes, get a workout when they're not at the gym. And so they've come to yoga for that reason. Well, then that for that particular beginner, yin's not going to be a good fit. They're just going to find it frustrating and they're going to feel disappointed. What if, however, somebody comes to yoga when they're new, either first time or still fairly new student, because actually they're looking to learn to meditate? Maybe they've heard meditation and yoga are kind of connected, even though unfortunately rarely are both in the same class, but that's a rant for a whole other time. Let's say that student comes and they're like, oh, I've heard that yoga is really good for you, for your mind. It helps to calm you down, kind of like meditation. I'd like to work with my mind more. I'd like to learn how to meditate. Okay, I'll go to yoga. So that beginner, ding, 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 ding. Oh my God, yin is going to be amazing for that particular beginner, because they're looking for some of these kind of quieter, deeper practices. So for that beginner, yin yoga would be the perfect choice, because the whole time they're in these poses, they're going to be getting these little 5-minute meditations or 2-minute meditations, or however long you're holding your poses for. They're going to get these little bite-sized doses of meditation so that they can experience some of the kind of mental and emotional aspects of a practice like this. That's assuming, of course, that the teacher is actually shutting up at some point and not just talking incessantly. And if your teacher, if you're listening and that kind of struck you, I have a whole episode on shutting up in yin in season 1. So if a student comes looking for a physical workout and they're a beginner, then yin is not for that beginner. If a student comes because they want to deal with their mind, they're wanting to be more mindful, they're wanting to learn how to deal with their mind, they're wanting that kind of grounding, then yin would be ideal for that particular beginner. What if a beginner is actually just, maybe they're I'll use an example of a mom, right? A mom of small kids, let's just say. They don't get any quiet time. They don't get any time to themselves. They're always go, 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 doing things, doing things, doing things. They're exhausted. They run off their feet, and they're constantly taking care of the needs of these little small humans that they are the mother to. Do we think that for that particular beginner, yin would be ideal? Hell yes, it would. Dedicated time just for them, where they can be still and quiet and not have somebody pulling on their clothes and demanding things of them. And they can just rest in their nervous system and nourish their body, and probably even fall asleep at some point if they're a mom of little ones. So for that beginner, would yin practice be good? Absolutely. It would be great for that beginner. So the reason that I'm pointing this out is, and I'm going to do a few more examples, don't worry, is that when people make blanket statements about anything in life, it's a bit immature. And I don't mean immature as in an insulting way. I mean, actually just like your knowledge is not well formed, right? You haven't studied or thought about it enough that you have a mature viewpoint on something. Or another word you could use is ignorant. And again, I'm not meaning ignorant as an insult. I'm meaning it as in the actual definition of the word, meaning you don't have the knowledge, skill, or experience in an area. So if somebody is sort of ignorant to the many, many, many benefits of yin, then they might not know that it could be for a whole bunch of beginners. So it's not whether or not someone's a beginner that denotes whether or not they should be doing yin. It's what are they coming to yoga for? So we've already used the example of the super kind of gym person, the person who really like wants a workout. And I remember very distinctly, and I talked about this bit more in the episode called Yin Yoga is Totally Hardcore. I remember being at a studio that I was teaching at and walking in right after one of their kind of hotter, sweatier classes. And one of this very young, fit, kind of Ken doll looking guy saying, oh, what class is next? Thinking, and I knew, of course, he wanted to double up. He was thinking, oh, maybe I'll stay for the second class. And I said, oh, it's yin. And he said, and I quote, fuck that shit. That shit scares me. I would do a handstand workshop over yin any day. Word for word quote. So, and he was not a beginner. So here's my point. He's an experienced yoga practitioner. He's been doing yoga for a few years already and is still a hell to the no with yin. So what I really want to break down in this episode is these ideas that we get and these sort of blanket statements that we make about whether or not something is this or that, this or that. You see this going all the time on social media. Is it this or that? Guess what? Sometimes it's yes and. Sometimes it's, it depends. And sometimes it's yes and no. And sometimes it's this and that. So in the case of somebody who is looking for a workout, regardless of whether or not they're a beginner, yin's not going to be their practice. I mean, there is the odd exception. Of course, somebody who might stumble into a yin class accidentally, end up falling in love with it, and add it to their repertoire, for sure, that could happen. But if their goal for going to yoga is, I want to sweat, I want to get stronger, this is my air quotes rest day from the gym, that person is not probably going to find that they love yin. It's not for that kind of beginner. If they're a beginner and they really want to start working with their mind, if they want to be more present, if they're, realizing that they've got a lot of stress and that they need to kind of down regulate and learn to work with their mind better, maybe they're doing some counseling or something even, but they're a beginner. For that beginner, yin is going to be epic because they're going to be taking these small poses and mini meditations from one pose to the next. So for that beginner, yin is amazing. We use the example of the beginner of the mom who has small kids, who just never ever gets any time to themselves, never any quiet time. People are always demanding things of her, pulling on her, et cetera, et cetera. And although I'm sure she loves her children, she just needs a freaking break. So for that beginner, yin is going to be amazing because she's really going to get a chance to settle, to ground, to not talk to people if she doesn't want to drop inward, and to really nourish herself. So for that beginner, yin would be amazing. For somebody who is working on healing their trauma, they're working with a therapist and they're at the stage in their therapy where they're clearly aware of their trauma and they're taking sort of active steps to work with their trauma. For that beginner, yin could be amazing. That would depend on the individual. And I did 3 trauma episodes back to back not long ago, so you can scroll and find those. And one of which, my friend and colleague, Janice Eisman, said that her trauma journey, that yin was a crucial part of that. It was one of the key tools she used. when she was working through and unearthing her trauma. So, of course, I can't make a blanket statement about everybody with trauma because, again, like everything in the real world, in the real adult world, it depends. Everything is gray. We don't know. Yes or no, maybe. But for some people, if they're looking for, again, that kind of quiet time to process their trauma, to have somebody hold brave space for them, then that might be the perfect beginner for yin yoga or not, depending. Who else would be a great beginner for yin yoga? Maybe somebody's dealing with some just kind of general mental health stuff, right? They've got some anxiety, they've got some depression, and they're just sort of feeling sort of on edge, right? That beginner might find a huge amount of solace in a yin yoga practice. Taking the time to slow down, to be quiet, to ground. Literally, you're on the ground. So grounding practice might be exactly what they need to add to their repertoire to help them. So those are all examples of beginners, different kinds of beginners. Here's another one. Let's say somebody is just coming out of some kind of an injury or a surgery, and they've been given the go-ahead by their doctor, to start exploring physical movement again and things like that. But they maybe have something like chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia. And so going to a really active moving class is just not possible for where they are in their healing journey. But a yin class for that beginner would be great because they can go and they can take this time to nourish their nervous system, which is just going to amplify their healing, and to do something good for their body and to begin to, again, befriend their body, to see their body as an ally instead of this thing where things are going wrong. For that beginner, yin would be an amazing practice. If somebody's got chronic fatigue, for that beginner, amazing practice. If somebody has just finished their battle with cancer, meaning they've done their chemo and all of that, and they're moving back into life, but they're exhausted still, for that beginner, yin would be amazing. For somebody who has a lot of excess weight and is really trying to take care of themselves and get moving and do things that are good for their body, but because of their size, just there's no way that they could do the average yoga class. For that beginner, yin would be amazing. Again, a great way to take care of their body, to befriend their body, to take time for themselves in a way that's nurturing and loving to their body, instead of another way to kind of beat their body up, which, despite our best intentions, sometimes as yoga teachers, when we come into these more movement-based classes, there can be a bit of that whole boot campy vibe, right? So for that beginner, yin would be amazing. For the fierce introvert, raises her own hand, right? For the person who just really is introverted. And I want to just clarify, I'm not talking about people that are shy. And if you just thought right now, wait, what? Introverts aren't always shy? No, they're not, my friend. And I'm not going to get into that because that could be a whole episode. And if y'all want that, let me know. It's not really yin related, but okay. But let's just say someone's an introvert and they're always out kind of in the world, and they find all that interaction with people eventually is draining. That's what happens with introverts. We refill our battery by taking still, quiet, alone time. So for that beginner, would a yin yoga practice be ideal? Yes, because they would be, even if they were in a public class, they would be on their own mat, sort of on their own little island. They don't have to necessarily talk to anybody. They can just come, do their thing, recharge their battery, and leave. Or for that person, even better might be to establish a home yin practice. They can just be at home with their tea and their blankies and they can do their yin and just recharge their batteries. So for that beginner, yin would be amazing. So I hope that you're starting to see my point here. That when we make these generalized statements with no nuance, no shades of gray, this black and white, that's not skillful. So to say, go around saying yin yoga is not for beginners, no, that's not true. It depends on the beginner. We're all individuals. We all have our own needs and the reasons that we're coming to yoga. Recently, and this changed kind of pre-COVID during COVID and post-COVID, there was a whole bunch of surveys that went around that were asking people why they came to yoga. And it used to be that people came to yoga for the physical aspects. They wanted to get more flexible, or they thought they were going to get in shape, or they wanted to get stronger, et cetera, et cetera. But what they're learning now is that the mass majority of people that are coming to yoga practice now are coming for the mental, emotional realm. They're coming for the mental health and the emotional health realm. And my friends, for that realm, Yin Yoga has it in spades. Yin Yoga's superpower is interoception, learning to drop in and go inside and see what's going on in there. This is Yin's superpower. So to make grand statements like Yin Yoga is, air quotes, not for beginners, is unskillful. So that's what I wanted to address first. Is Yin Yoga for beginners? Well, it depends on the beginner. It depends on why they're coming to yoga, what they're personally going through mentally, emotionally, physically, what their goals are with yoga, right? So we can't make these statements. Yin Yoga is not for beginners. I have beginners I teach only 2 drop-in classes at the time of this recording for one studio because I don't love drop-in classes, but I love this studio. I make an exception for them because they're amazing. Anyways, I always have a beginner. Maybe not each week, but like beginners are super common. They're either a brand new student period to yoga altogether, which is actually easier. I'll talk more about that in a moment. Or they're a beginner and they've done a few classes, but they've been more active classes. So they're a yin yoga beginner. There may be still a beginner in yoga in general, and they're brand new to yin. And that happens all the time in my class, all the time. And they do great. The students do great. So I don't know where this idea came from that yin yoga is not a beginner practice. If someone knows where this idea came from, please let me know. But I'm going to remedy it now. You cannot make that statement because each person is individual. Just like you cannot say the right way to do this pose is blank, 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 because we are all individuals. And so what might be the right way for you to do a pose might be different than the way I would need to do the pose. Same thing goes with our students. Not all beginners, you can't lump all beginners like one little category together like they're all the same. So I want to just dispel that myth. Is Yin Yoga for beginners? Depends on the beginner. Why are they coming to yoga? What are their goals? How are they feeling physically, mentally, emotionally? So that is all important first. Then I want to mention the other elephant in the room, that there are people who have been practicing yoga for many, many, many years and would still find yoga super challenging because their practice has been purely physical asana. They haven't done meditation. They haven't maybe even done a lot of kind of some of these quieter breath work or pranayams. They're the ones that want to leave before shavasana, or they fidget during shavasana. And again, that could also be a trauma response. So put that as a little sidebar for that, put a pin in that. But I'm not talking about that example, but just people who are like, I'm just here for the workout, right? And that student could have been doing yoga for several years and still not be an ideal candidate for yin yoga. So they're not a beginner. They've got lots of yoga experience, but maybe yin still isn't a fit. Like the The guy I was telling you about in the story who came into the studio, strong guy, lots of physical practice, can do all the fancy poses, the strong ones, handstands, etc., blah, blah, blah. And yin yoga scared him, likely because of the still and quiet. So if somebody doesn't want to go into their inner landscape, if they don't want to practice interoception, if they don't want to be curious about their body and their experience, then they might not be a great candidate for yin yoga. But that is not attached to whether or not they are a beginner. You could have someone with years of experience who still isn't willing to do that. And you could have somebody who walks into a yoga studio and signs up because they're like, I want to learn to meditate. You cannot say one is a beginner thing and one is not. And if you are saying that, you're really kind of putting people in boxes and making statements and generalizations about people that just probably aren't true. So that being said, now that I've kind of popped the balloon of, yin yoga isn't for beginner, what I think also might be helpful here, though, is to talk about, especially because I know a lot of teachers listen to this, well, then what do we do when we have some beginners in our practice, right? Because let's face it, yin yoga is different. And it might be different than what they've seen on TV or in the magazines if they're brand new. It might be different than if they're still a beginner, but they've been to a few classes, the movement-based classes that they've done. And so how do we make the yin practice the most digestible for beginners? Now that is worth exploring. So I said a few minutes ago that it's actually kind of easier sometimes in some ways if somebody's brand new to yoga, they've never done yoga, and you happen to be teaching a yin class and that's their first introduction. So in some ways that's easier because they don't already have preconceived ideas about what yoga practice is. I mean, they may have seen, a DVD or a video or, like a thing on YouTube or a magazine or, so they may have kind of some idea, but they don't really have like a felt embodied experience of yoga yet. So actually for that person, it's a little easier to introduce them to yin because you don't have to kind of point out differences. But for those that have done a few classes, now they're maybe a yin beginner, they've never done yin yoga before. I personally think that if you have beginners in the room, it's really helpful to break it down a little bit before you move into quiet. So anyone who's listened before knows I am a big fan of shutting the fuck up, dear teachers, in your yin class. Quit talking so much. However, if you have beginners in the room, it can be helpful at the start to explain a few things, just so that they have a bit of a mental picture of how this practice is different. It will make it easier on them mentally and emotionally to be in the practice if they kind of know what to expect, right? If they're expecting a bunch of sun salutations and chaturangas and then you never get them off the floor, their mind is going to be telling them all kinds of stories about that while they're trying to practice. But if you can address that at the beginning, then it's easier for people to settle into practice. So how do we even know, though, if there are beginners in the room? That's the tricky bit. I'm not a big fan of asking people while everyone's seated to raise their hand if they're new, because anyone who is kind of shy or introverted is going to feel really uncomfortable doing that. So they may not do it because they just don't feel comfortable with it. Or somebody might be like, oh yeah, I mean, I'm new to yoga, but I'm super fit. So whatever. So they don't raise their hand because they think like whatever yoga can throw at them, they can handle. So no need to bring themselves out as a beginner. So that can also happen. So I'm not a big fan of like the raise your hand if you've never done yin before. Well, everyone's seated at the start of class. But what I do instead is, because I always get my students in constructive rest, and their grounding. And so right before I get everybody to move into their next shape or their first technically yin shape, I say, if you've done yin yoga before, let both hands rest at your sides. If you've never done yin before, specifically the style of yin yoga, Put one hand on your belly so that I know. So now people are a lot more willing to out themselves as a beginner because I'm the only one looking at them. So I'll look around, and sometimes you got to say this twice, especially if you've done a good job of kind of centering and relaxing them from the beginning. And I'll look around and just see like how many hands are on bellies. If there's a lot of hands on bellies, more talking in the beginning. If there's no hands on bellies, I'll usually clarify just to make sure so nobody's brand new to Yin. If there's no hands on bellies, that's different. And then if there's a few, that might also affect how much I am going to talk. So here's what I do for brand new Yin students, whether they're brand new to yoga or just brand new to the style of Yin. I break down the Yin practice guidelines. And you may have heard other teachers talk about these Yin practice guidelines. Mine's a little bit more lengthy, a little more complex because I'm a yoga therapist. I'm all about the subtlety and the nuance and, So the first Yin practice guideline, and this is what I say to them. Practicing Yin yoga is a little bit different than movement forms of yoga. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those differences and how we practice Yin so that you have an idea of what we're going to get up to, which will make it easier for you to practice, right? Simple statements. Principle number 1, take the shape. So take the Yin shape and take the version that's going to work for you, because I'll usually give them several options. So take the Yin shape, find a version that's going to work for you. That's point number 1. Point number 2, find 50 to 60% of the most you could do in this shape. Why am I pointing that out? Well, because we live in this culture of pushing, striving, efforting, et cetera, et cetera. And so I want them to know that what you can hold for 30 seconds is not the same as what you can hold for 5 minutes. So we want to find 50 to 60% of the most that you could do. And then I explained to them too that 50 to 60% is a bit of a moving line in the sand, because your body won't feel the same the first breath in this shape as it does in the last breath. So although point number 3, become relatively still. So although we're becoming relatively still in Yin, we're not being stagnant. So if partway through your body opens and you need to change your approach to get a little deeper, or maybe you do the opposite, maybe you were overly ambitious and you now realize, oh, I need to back out of this a little bit because 5 minutes does feel a lot longer than 30 seconds, right? That this is kind of a moving line in the sand, and where 50 to 60% is for their body is in that shape will change within the time that they're in the pose. It might change from last week to next week, etc. So I let them know this may change. You may adapt your pose, but that we're working into relative stillness, right? Stillness, but not stagnation. So it is a still practice, but please feel free to grab a prop if you need, or to adjust the pose partway through. Okay, so far we've got take the shape, find a version that works for you, 50 to 60%, become relatively still, letting yourself be adaptable. And then number 4 is that I tell them we're going to be holding these shapes anywhere between 2 and 5 minutes. Now, I say 2 and 5 minutes because for a general drop-in class, that's my range. When I've got a mixed group of different levels of yogis, some that have been doing it in a long time, some that maybe never have, I'm going to stick in the 2 to 5 minute range. That's certainly not a rule. I know lots of teachers in their own practice, or maybe with experienced students, that do longer than 5 minute holds. That's fine. But I say 2 to 5 minutes because it's a general drop-in class with a bunch of different experience levels. Okay, so I say we're going to hold these shapes anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes at a time. And then I talk about coming out. When you come out of, and I briefly explain that one of the reasons that we are doing this longer hold and the stillness and the moderation of the practice, that these 3 things, stillness, moderation, longer holds, are the secret superpowers to helping you address your deep fascia and large bands of connective tissue, which Yin Yoga is really good at. And then I explained to them, so that means if when you come out of this shape, you feel that urge to sort of moan and groan and move slowly, if you feel temporarily vulnerable or fragile, or like you're not quite all put together, that's a good sign. It's a sign of a job well done. And so we do just that. And so then my next point would be, We come out slowly and mindfully, and then we pause to notice what my teacher Paul called the rebound, but I call the resonance or the linger of that pose in your body. So we take maybe 30 seconds between sides if it's an asymmetrical pose, or a minute if we're doing a longer held shape. We take that sacred intentional pause. Again, I've done a whole episode on that called Honoring the Rebound. We take that sacred pause, and that pause is to allow your body to begin to feel like its familiar self again before you ask it to do something else, to allow your body and your nervous system to integrate what has happened, and to embrace the space between no longer and not yet. To embrace the space between no longer and not yet, otherwise known as the present moment, because this is one of the other huge benefits of a yin practice, is coming back to the present moment again and again and again. And so I'll explain that. We come out mindfully and slowly. You might feel like you want to moan and groan, and then we pause for noticing the resonance of the pose or the linger. Again, Paul uses the word rebound. And these rests and resonance, I don't tell them what position to take. I don't boss them around. I give them some ideas. You could lay here, you could hug your knees in, you could do this. I say sometimes our rests are quite still. Sometimes our rests are a little wiggly. You choose whatever your body just asked you to do is probably the right answer. And it might be different in the next pose or the next class, right? So we take that sacred minute or 30 seconds to notice the resonance of the pose in their body. And then we take the next shape. So that all sounded really long because I'm breaking it down for you super, super detailed. But basically, the guidelines and the principles I'm talking are about: take the shape and find the version that works for you. Find relative stillness. Hold for, 2 to 5 minutes at a time. Come out slowly and mindfully. Oh, I think I missed 50 to 60%. Let's try that again. So those principles again are: take the shape, find the version that works for you, find 50 to 60% of the most you could do, knowing that that's a moving line in the sand and you may adjust it partway through. And then we're going to hold anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes at a time. When you come out, you might feel that urge to sort of moan and groan and move slowly and mindfully. And then the last one, we rest and we pause in the resonance before we take the next shape. So that's 5 points that I discuss. And I just go over them sort of point form. And then after I tell them how they're going to do the practice physically, like that's all the physical stuff, right? Then I point out that at some point soon in the not too far off future, I'm going to quit talking so much. And that what can happen when the teacher stops talking and the mind isn't used to having still, quiet time, is the mind can then use this as an opportunity to get some things done. So this is where I would discuss some of the mental aspects of yin: the thinking, the planning, the list writing, the analyzing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I explain to them that this is normal, that this will happen with their mind, and that it's common, that every single person in this room has a busy brain. And then I give them some anchors for where they could, if they'd like to. I give them some tools. I don't just say, okay, so I'm going to shut up and go ahead and be present, and good luck with that. I give them tools that they can choose to use or not. And again, I went over all of this in depth in the episode about the mind in season 1. So, you can backtrack to season 1 and find Yin Yoga and the Mind. And I talk about more details about what I offer students to work with their mind. So that's what I do if I've checked in with the group and there are beginners in the room. If people have put their hand on their belly and said that they're new to Yin, then I'm going to go over that little speech a little quicker than what I just did with you. But because that allows those beginners to understand that, oh, this practice is different than maybe yoga I've seen in magazines or on YouTube or the odd yoga class that I've taken. or the yoga that my friend does or whatever. They understand that yin is different and here's how it's different. And they kind of have some guidelines to practice with, which will allow their mind to settle a little bit more. And then you can give them some tools on how to deal with the mind. So I would give those that same breakdown, those same points, whether somebody was brand new to yoga, period, and they're in my yin class, or whether they've been doing yoga for years, but they've never done yin. It's the same points. I give them the same thing because they are now a beginner in yin, even if they are not a beginner in yoga. So I give them those points, and then I slowly start to move into more and more quiet. So I hope that that is helpful. First of all, I hope that I've pleaded my case for breaking this myth that yin yoga is not for beginners. That's not true. It all depends on the beginner and their needs and their mental state and their goals and what they're coming in with, right? For some beginners, yin will be amazing. For other beginners, maybe not. And that even somebody who has years and years and years of yoga experience in other styles of yoga, particularly the more kind of physically demanding styles of yoga, the hot, sweaty kinds, if they've been doing a lot of that, but they're not a beginner at all to yoga, they might still have a big challenge coming into a yin class. That we cannot use the foundation of experience level in yoga as a way to decide whether or not somebody is going to be a good candidate for a yin yoga practice. It's not their experience level that determines whether or not yin yoga would be a good fit for them. It's who they are, their goals, what they're working through, what they're dealing with, and what they come into the door with. That's what decides whether or not yin yoga is suitable for that person. And I gave at the beginning of this a boatload of examples of people who might all be absolute beginners who yin yoga would be amazing for. The other thing that I just want to point out is that with beginners, you are going to have to repeatedly tell them to do less. So I said 50 to 60%. I realize a lot of the books say 70%. That's because I'm a yoga therapist and I've worked with a lot of A-type people who, when you say 70%, they're going to do like 120. And so that is why I say 50 to 60%. But you'll have to remind people because we walk in the door often with these, especially those people who've done a lot of like really physical kind of challenging yoga, you know, the vinyasa lovers and the handstand people, and they will probably need reminders that actually in a yin practice, less is more. That if you're trying to affect the deep fascia, that pushing, efforting, and striving is actually cutting you off from addressing the deep fascia, because your body starts to move into fight, flight, or freeze response. Everything starts to tighten up, and now you're not relaxed enough in a moderate amount to get into that deep fascia. So you may have to point that out to all beginners, regardless of, you know, their experience in other styles of yoga. Okay. I think that that's probably enough to talk about whether or not yin is appropriate for beginners. Again, we have to watch as teachers our tendency to make these blanket statements about whole mass groups of people. That's ridiculous. We can't say all beginners this, or, you know, we could use genders, and we can't say all women this, all men this, all like, no, there are shades of gray. And what might be a perfect fit for one beginner might not at all be a fit for another. So let's not make these blanket statements. Let's not go out in the world telling people that beginners can't do yin yoga. Of course they can, if they want to, if it fits their needs, if it fits their goals. All right, my friends, I think that's enough of that. I hope that you found this helpful. By all means, please continue. And I have been getting from a lot of you, you know, DMs and, you know, Facebook messages. And by the way, if you have the choice of Facebook or Instagram, please contact me via Instagram. I don't spend a lot of time on Facebook. I go into the groups and I get the hell out of there because I don't like it. I only like the groups. But, for those of you who've been sending me little love notes about the podcast and how it's helped your teaching and given me some of your ahas, thank you so much. It makes my heart squeal with glee because, my intention when creating this podcast was to make it educational and to really help teachers teach and to have the skills and the tools to be able to do that more effectively. So the fact that I've been getting that feedback from you means that I'm on course. So thank you so much. So if you have any key takeaways from this episode, I would love it if you would write a written review if you're on Apple, or do a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify, or if you're watching on YouTube, leave me some comments, like the video, subscribe. If you want to send me a DM letting me know your ahas, that would be awesome, on Instagram. And, if you've done all that already, if you're like, Nick, I subscribed right away from your first episode. Nick, I've already offered a review. Nick, I'm already following you all everywhere and listening to all the things. If that's you, thank you, Rockstar. If you don't mind maybe taking a screenshot of this episode and sharing it in your Instagram stories and tag me at Nick Danu Yoga or at Yin Yoga Podcast, then I can share the love. I'd be super grateful for that. That only works, by the way, if your account is public. So if your account is private, I won't see that you've shared it. So there's that. Okay. Until we meet again, my friends, bye for now.